All right. All of our friends are on the road, literally on the road. Yeah, I was going to say hello to Rob. I'm sure he's watching from the road.
Or listening.
Or
Hopefully not watching.
listening from the road. Hopefully not watching. Hopefully just listening from the road. Welcome back to Learners in Minyan, friends. We've gone through a great deal of our service over the past year, but I thought we would give some special attention to the Torah service this evening. About it, and I thought maybe a little bit of background would be helpful. As most people know, the Shabbat service, the Torah service, that's the highlight, the public reading of the Torah. It is the oldest continuous element of Jewish public worship known to us. And I say known to us, there might have been others, but this one we know. All the way from the Second Commonwealth period, both in the land of Israel and the diaspora. We'll talk a little bit more about that time period in a moment. Now, when we say earliest record of public ritual associated, we take record a little bit with a grain of salt, since it is in our Tanakh. It was written about. We cannot be sure that it occurred in this way, but that is the earliest record of public ritual associated with reading the Torah. And from Nehemiah 8, I'll read you this really nice scene, actually. It's very cool. When the 7th month arrived, the Israelites being settled in their towns, the entire people assembled as one man in the square before the water gate. They asked Ezra the scribe to bring the scroll of the teaching of Moses, with which the Lord had charged Israel. On the first day of the 7th month, Ezra the priest brought the teaching before the congregation, men and women, and all who could listen with understanding. He read from it, facing the square before the water gate from the first light until midday, to the men and women and those who could understand. The ears of all the people were given to the scroll of the teaching. Ezra the scribe stood upon a wooden tower made for the purpose and opened the scroll in the sight of the people, for he was above all the people. As he opened it, all the people stood up. Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen, Amen, with hands upraised, and they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves before the Lord with their faces to the ground. So hopefully you can see where the rabbis later got their ideas for what a Torah service should look like. It's on a bima, it's up above, right? Men and women and all who can understand. Hebrew was a language of the literati, the elite. Most people had to learn it. Most people spoke Aramaic or other languages at the time. So all those who did know Hebrew could do it. And he read it in the morning all the way till midday. So a lot of these elements we'll see transfer over into our practices. Between the 2nd and 6th century CE, that's the post-Talmudic period or the Talmudic period before the Gaonic period. This is the time when the Mishnah and the Talmud were being canonized. And it makes sense that the rabbis took hold of this and really put this together. It is then, period, thanks to the writings of our rabbis and our sages, that the Torah became a distinctive ritual object. I mean, it had ritual associated with it, ritual surrounded it. This was the object of which things would occur. Amazingly enough, the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I had the pleasure of learning a little bit about at Spertus, as late as the 1st century, the Dead Sea Scrolls linked the Torah reading with communal prayer, meaning as early as the 1st century, it was meant to do something as a community. Everyone needed to be there. It meant to be not a private activity, but the reading of the Torah was something of a communal prayer act. And we see this in parts of the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that, about how people did that, but also all the way up until the post-Talmudic period. And I say this a lot when we have the Torah service. The Torah service is meant to represent something, and it's meant to reenact the revelation at Sinai. Meaning the liturgy is built to go through a reenactment each Saturday morning of receiving the Torah. And that comes from Rav Soloveitchik, and I really like that interpretation. So Nachmanides, in terms of Torah study, Talmud Torah study, he said listeners must pay close attention to Torah, exerting their intellectual capacities to the fullest. Meaning that if you're asleep for the rest of the service, wake up for this part. This part's important, right? You have to pay attention, right? You can imagine that as the rabbis built this structure and the liturgy started to come around with prayer books and things like that, that laws started to be enacted about how the Torah was read, right? They took the aspects of Nehemiah, they took the aspects from their time, 2nd to 6th century, and they came up with these laws, these rabbinic laws. So the Torah shouldn't be open for a long amount of time. Don't leave it out. It's only the minimum amount of time that we need. You're going to read it. And as soon as you're done reading, you're supposed to roll it up. So you see that there are some minhags who do different minhags about this. Some people just roll it up. Some people actually cover the Torah with the Torah cover while they're doing other things, right? These are all different minhag understandings of this law. There's nothing from the Torah about it, but it is Talmudic in nature. And so it's just about, you don't want to just open doing nothing. You want it to be doing something. Not, you cover it back up. As most people are taught super early on, you don't touch the parchment. We have oils in our skin, and it can really do some damage to the parchment itself. That being said, the reason why we wrap our Torah in all these beautiful things, the cover and the crowns and all these sort of things, is so we can touch that, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about the distance of Torah that happened later in terms of not being able to touch it. But there actually are some people who say you shouldn't even touch the Torah with the yad itself, that the yad can do some damage. I mean, it's just a question of being careful. You want to build a fence around it, right? Obviously, you don't want to use your fingers. And they're like, look, if you have to, sometimes when you're doing Havdalah, you have to touch, that's fine. But the idea is to not touch it as much as possible, okay? So the idea of aliyot, people coming up, right? Aliyah, to come up to the raised platform, which we now call the bima, to, at this point, say a blessing. You can see from Nehemiah 8 where they got that from, right? They blessed. This blessing that was always accompanied with it. The one that we have was developed later, of course. But the practice of it was, and this again goes back to the idea of the tribal aspects, the hierarchy, that the order of aliyot would be kohens, meaning a priest or a descendant of the priest. Obviously, by the time this was created, there were no more kohens or Levites, but there were descendants of those, people who called themselves kohens or kohen. Then there are Levites, the second aspect of the priestly class, and then Israelite. It's still used today in Orthodox shuls, and I think conservative shuls sometimes. Reform practice moved away from that for a lot of reasons. They also, other shuls moved away from the practice of money. You used to buy your way up to the aliyah. In terms of reform practice, more of egalitarian sort of view started to come up and saying, look, it doesn't matter if your great billion grandfather was a Kohen or whatever, it doesn't matter. Whoever wants to read, come read. Okay, everyone feels equal approaching the Torah and having an aliyah. So that's unique to reform practice. Okay, since the Talmudic era, meaning 2nd to 5th century or even 6th century CE, when Torah was read, at least we believe, the days were Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. And we've spoken about this a lot. This arrangement by the rabbis was to guarantee that a Jewish community wouldn't go more than 3 consecutive days without a formal reading of the Torah. Why Monday, Thursday, and Saturdays? Monday, Thursday, and Saturday Saturdays were called market days. Those were the days when, during this era, people would go out into the market, and the Torah was actually read out in the space. Okay, so it was like the best crowd you're going to get was on Monday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Okay, the other days were fine, but these were the days where you'd have the best audience, the most opportunity to reach as many kingdom people as possible. When we go a little bit later, and we talk about this in terms of, and I think I talk about this. Yeah, well, okay, good. Just want to make sure. I'll get to it. Good. In ancient Israel, and still in Israel, some shuls in Israel today, they have what's called a triennial cycle of reading the Torah. You read enough of the Torah, it's split up so that you go from Genesis to Deuteronomy in 3 years. So that's called the triennial cycle. And there actually are some shuls in America who do it. It's really up to them. Mostly in the diaspora, meaning outside of Israel, we do the annual cycle, where we do 1 year. We start right at Simchat Torah and go back at Simchat Torah. You know, one year. Okay, 54 portions are parshiot, right? Our parshas. And in order to make it, sometimes, thanks to our lunar calendar, mixing with our solar calendar, sometimes we have to do a double portion or something like that. But the idea is, in 1 year, you complete the Torah reading, the entire Torah reading. Okay, here's what I want to talk about in terms of the Friday evening service. Friday evening service, Torah, has been familiar to Reform Judaism for a long time. I say a long time, that's sort of relative, because if it's been done for 100 years, and we've been around for 3,000 years, it's not that long. But it's long enough that people care. Why did they move the Torah service from Saturday mornings to Friday night? Well, they were following along what they thought was the same idea of the market day. The best attended service that they had was Friday night. So they thought, well, that's what we should do. There was no Talmudic or rabbinic or really Jewish reason for it. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we're talking about in Germany and in America as well, Saturdays were the only days that Jews could go shop. Why? Because they worked Monday through Friday, and guess what happened on Sunday? Everything was closed. So and this had a profound effect on Shomer Shabbos as well. If Sunday everything was closed and they couldn't do anything they wanted, Saturdays became the only day that they could go out and shop. They could go out and assimilate. So this was an era of German Jewry and Reform Judaism, and certainly in America as well. So they said, well, look, Saturdays, we need to go shopping, we need to go do all that. On Sunday, everything's closed. So in order to do that, we moved our services completely to Friday. And Saturday services were basically eradicated for a while in Reform Judaism. Imagine that, right? You'll just say, no more Saturday morning services. There was even a time, and it was not very long, but a minhag that took place for a little while was they actually moved Shabbat services to Sunday for the same reasons, right? Saturday is our market day. Sunday, everyone's closed, everyone's in church, right? This was the radicalization of the reform a little bit, and we're very thankful that we're not in that area anymore. But that's what was going on in terms of that period. So the reading of the Torah Friday night was done only out of necessity. When things started to change in America, meaning that things were open again on Sunday, and Shomer Shabbos started to go away a little bit more in terms of the Reform community, they realized that they could have Saturday morning services back and then go shopping afterwards or whatever it is, depending. And so Torah service, for the most part, was moved back to Saturday. However, we all know the power of minhag. If this is the way it's done, that's the way it's done. So it stayed in Friday night services. Simply custom and comfort. That was it. with the exception of very, very, very tiny congregations, meaning student pulpits, things where like in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where I would go, there's 10 people there, and that was once a month that I would see them. Reformed congregations are very quickly moving back into Saturday morning services, reclaiming that tradition as it moves closer and closer to contemporary reform, shedding off the classical reform. It's rare that you would find, I would say, what we call a B congregation and larger, meaning 300 families and larger, doing a Friday night Torah service. Typically, it's A congregations, 300 and under, but even those are sort of going away. Okay, so the presentation of the Torah. What happens when we take it out? The public Torah reading is preceded by an elaborate ceremony of removing the scroll from the ark while declaring or singing thematic relevant verses from Scripture. We know that. Our service starts, and there's all kinds of stuff that happens on our page 362. It's paraded through the congregation, the hakafah, so that each person can receive the Torah. People used to bow, people can touch it. And this is where I wanted to talk about the distance that people have found in terms of Torah, in terms of classical reform. Classical reform practice actually for a while removed the hakafah, removed that with the ideas of what was called 19th century decorum. You guys know that word, decorum? That means you need to sit quietly, dress the right way, don't move, don't do anything, and the cantor's going to sing, and you're just supposed to smile and nod. That was 19th century, and even into early 20th century decorum, right? That's why we get dressed up, right? It's why we're shaped the way we are, right? There was a huge thing about decorum. So they thought, well, anything that was more sort of happy, clappy, enjoying yourself was sort of, and hakafah, people enjoyed, they got happy. So they removed that. Of course, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but you can get the idea that practice was removed to keep the decorum of the professional aspect of the service. An interesting, what do we call these things? Side effect that happened is that people lost a feeling of closeness with the Torah. A distance started to grow, and people started to think you're not allowed to even go near it. They don't bring it to us. They keep it up on the bima. Only the rabbi can touch it. All these sort of things, right? So that's where you started to get people reaching out with their prayer books. Like, that's about as close as I'm supposed to get to the Torah. That's it. It comes from this sort of old sort of distance, right? And I've seen a little bit of that even here when I started, that people weren't sure, and I had to be like, it's okay, you can touch it. What you're supposed to do is give it a big hug. You're supposed to take it and embrace it. And people used to hug and kiss it. It's okay. And people are like, I'm sure I'm supposed to touch it. It's okay. I'm touching it. You're touching it. So that's something that's something we're trying to bring, that when the Torah comes out, it's okay to stand up. It's okay to be happy, clappy. It's okay to hug and touch it, to close that distance so that everyone gets close to Torah. Certainly we know the songs that we sing, Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, right? Baruch Shanatan, the rabbinic benediction. The Ki Mitzion is from Isaiah 2:3. Frankly, interesting choice. Ki Mitzion Tetzei Torah, from Zion comes Torah. If you've been to any of my adult education classes, a lot of the scholars talk about how crazy that is, considering it should be Ki Sinai, right? Actually, Torah came from Sinai, not Sinai, but that's a whole other class. Sushar, you might see, and you'll see it in our prayer book. It was added into the service in our the predecessor, Gates of Prayer, and then Mishkan Tefillah. That comes as early as the Hamburg Prayer Book, 1819, and was a Sephardic custom. The Ashkenazic custom of repeating the words of the Shema. That's ours. And you will see, by the way, when we're talking about Sephardic customs and Ashkenazic customs, that Reform Judaism, contemporary Reform, is sort of a mixture of both. We take some things from Sephardic customs and some from Ashkenazic. Okay, so the Ashkenazic custom was when the Torah comes out, and we see this, we sing Shema again. right? Only this time, instead of the Baruch, right, we say Echad Eloheinu Gadol Ha'olam, right? In the 19th century, a nice guy named Solomon Zolzer composed that Shema that you all know, right? Shema Yisrael, I don't know. He composed that for the Torah service. That was a staple, and it has been there since, okay? It's, I think, one of the oldest things that we do, right? It was not meant for the rest of the service. It's been moved to many settings. Some people believe this is the only Shema in the world. Some people believe that Shema dates back to the Talmudic era, that people sang it on the steps of the temple. You know, that's how powerful Zolzer is. But what's true about Zolzer is he was a reformer. He abandoned traditional nusach at the time, 19th century nusach, and wrote in the style of his times. In other words, when we sing Shema Yisrael, we're singing 1800s ditty. That was the style of that time. So we continue to live out Zolzer's legacy by adding new music from our own time. And I thought you would sort of be aghast at how much people insist on doing this. But that's just my own commentary on my buddy Solomon Zolzer. Finally, a couple things left. How are we doing on time? Okay. Haggadah, lifting the Torah. Many of you have been on my yacht squad and have lifted the Torah some many times over. I know David is a veteran of the Haggadah. This is an Ashkenazi custom to raise and then put away the Torah after the read, bind it up. Okay. The Sephardic Torah does it in a sort of different way. If you've ever seen a Sephardic Torah, they don't read the Torah down like this. They have a upright holder where they actually read it vertically instead of horizontally. My previous congregation, we had a Sephardic Torah. It's very cool, very beautiful. It's this cylinder that stands, and you just sort of unlock it and open it up, and you read it horizontally. It's very, very cool. So in Ashkenazi congregations, you retain the Torah in its open state, then you open it further, showing 3 columns. Why 3? We love 3. It's turned in all directions so everyone can see. This comes from Shulchan Aruch, 16th century. This was interesting. When you're reading this, there are rules about this. People who are not strong enough to lift and control it shouldn't be called for this honor. If you don't feel you're strong enough, you're not supposed to. I always want to help. So anyone who wants to try, I'll help. But that is the old school rules, right? You also may notice the Sephardic custom. And this is so interesting. You see the match of Ashkenazi and Sephardic coming together, right? The Sephardic custom, if you ever see around their pinky and hold it up, right? And they say, Vizota Torah. Anyone did it? No? Come on. Okay, well, that's interesting. I guess it sort of didn't catch on here at Temple Israel. Come on. But I wanted to talk about this because this is one of those wonderful things that people have been doing for so long and they have no idea why. Some say that it's humility, right? The pinky finger, you can't point. It's rude to point at something with a pointer finger. They say that the middle finger probably meant what it means today, so you can't do that to the Torah. It is uncomfortable to point with your ring finger, so the pinky was left. So there's that. There's also people who believe that there is a thought that this was a Roman custom, that it had something to do with Caesar, and we've lost that. Some say it has to do with this Isaiah verse, which who measured the waters with the hollows of his hand, engaged this guy with a span, sort of spanning out your fingers, that sort of thing. This is my favorite guess. Snuff was distributed during the reading of the Torah, and by the time the raising of the Torah came, people's fingers were soiled, and so they could only use their pinkies. I love that. How about that? Who knew what was going on in these temples, right? And as I said, the only finger left to do it is the little one. But you'll see people they'll do it, and they'll do it with intensity, and we have no idea why. I love that in Judaism. We got good ideas, but we have no idea. Overall, the Torah service, if you look at it from page 362 on in our Mishkan Tefillah, certainly on Saturday mornings when you come and you follow along, try to see how it does sort of mirror the revelation at Sinai. Right? We all stand up. There's a lot of show and big, and I've talked about this before, and that the Saturday morning certainly built, the rubric is actually built to lead up to this big moment, right? Starting from the Birkot HaShachar all the way to Pizukei Simra, Tefillah Amidah, all the way up to the Torah service. It's that big of a deal. So I encourage you to take a look on our Saturday mornings when we read the Torah and say, oh, what is sort of Sinaitic, or I understand that sort of thing. Okay, so we have a couple minute or two for some questions on what we thought about today. Yeah.
So two questions. One, does Reform Judaism require a minyan to read the Torah?
Great question. The story of the Minyan in CCR Responsa has been that while certainly we encourage it and we want it, the emphasis on the reading, and not just reading the Torah, right? Mornish Kaddish, all that sort of stuff, all those rules, right? The emphasis has moved in Reform away from the idea of, well, we can't do something if there's not enough, and to give to the people who are there. Now, a lot of this has helped since we recognize women in terms of the minyan, so that certainly adds to the numbers. But sometimes it's just not possible. And so the idea is what's more important? What's important is providing that service together. The response of the rabbis will say, try your best, get a minyan. But if it's 9, if it's 8, okay, count the Torahs, something like that. Your other question. Yeah.
And then the question is, so the minhag in Temple Israel is we don't read the Torah every week or the entire Torah portion. Is that custom specific to Temple Israel, or is that a Reform Judaism?
No. The ideas of how much to read the Torah is completely subjective, right? The idea of the parshiot is subjective. The idea of and the idea in terms of how many services can you have, all of that is substantive upon what is realistic, right? So it's really up to there is a sense of autonomy in terms of all congregations, not just Reform congregations, but the idea of how much you read. No, it's not necessarily Reform, and certainly not Temple Israel. At seminary, at HEC, it would always be 3 aliyot, I think maybe verses or something like that. The point of and that's one that I pulled in, the point of it was the idea that what you're reading about in the Torah, at least in Reform practices, you want to highlight what that's about. So you want to read a section that means something. You want to speak on that topic for your Torah. You want to have people focus on that part and have it be meaningful. I'm not sure if that would be a necessarily Reform practice. I've been to conservative shuls and they pick a part to say this is what I want to focus on. But again, it's all very subjective. I think rabbi to rabbi can. Last question before we do Shabbat. No, that good, huh? Okay, cool. I love it. Okay, friends, take a minute. We'll get into Shabbat mode and make sure you grab our Mishkan Tefillah, our prayer book, and our flyer, which is going to have some lyrics to some songs that are also important. Okay, thank you very much.
Nice job.
Oh, thanks. It's every first Shabbat that we do this.